last 2 years, Frontline has watched what looked like a revolution. From a dictatorship to democratic elections.
Dr. Mohammed Morsi.
Unfortunately, he was no Mandela.
From the overthrow of a new president.
We were chanting against Morsi, they were chanting against the Muslim Brotherhood, and some people were chanting for the military.
To the military taking control. What happened to Egypt's revolution?
Was the military responding to the will of the people or making this all happen?
And what will come next?
With Sisi, we have something much more ominous, much more dangerous.
Global Post's Charles Sennett reports for Frontline on Egypt in crisis.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Major support for Frontline is provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is available at macfound.org. Additional funding is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to heightening public awareness of critical issues, the Wincoat Foundation, and by the Frontline Journalism Fund, with grants from Millicent Bell through the Millicent and Eugene Bell Foundation, and Scott Nathan and Laura DeBonis.
2.5 years ago, I came to Egypt and witnessed what we thought was a revolution. I watched as young activists marched to Tahrir, or Liberation Square. I watched as they were joined by Egyptians of all ages and all classes, men and women. I was there day and night for 2 weeks. One evening, I listened as a young songwriter named Rami Hassan performed an anthem for what the people called the January 25th Revolution. It was a time of incredible hope and high expectations. But I had come on a specific mission. I had come to understand the role of the long outlawed Islamist group, the Muslim Brotherhood.
Hi, I'm Charles. Nice to meet you.
On Tahrir Square, I found Mohammed Abbas, a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood's youth wing. Abbas had been working alongside secular activists to help organize the revolt. He was eager to show us what he and his fellow brothers had contributed.
هنا عند عمر مكرم ده مدخل من مداخل ميدان التحرير مدخل كوبري قصر النيل هنا في الحواجز برضو.
Abbas pointed out how the brothers were in charge of the security checkpoints, serving hot tea, distributing blankets, printing posters, and running an emergency health clinic. They were holding the revolution's infrastructure together.
The ability and the good ability to organize. Yes. We are the best in Egypt to organize.
At the same time, they wanted to keep a low profile. The Brotherhood was worried that Mubarak would succeed in portraying the revolution as a Muslim Brotherhood conspiracy. We saw this sensitivity play out when this man approached our camera holding up his pocket Quran. I watched as Mohammed Abbas took him aside and told him to put it away. Abbas then explained what was going on.
All of Egyptian not want to make this evolution take Muslim Brotherhood show.
We should all do something like this.
The more I got to know Abbas, the more I realized how different he was than older, more conservative brothers I had encountered in the past. But still, there were many on the square who feared the Muslim Brotherhood was hijacking the revolution. I spoke to this young law student who had been here from the beginning.
So you were here on the 25th and you saw a change here. Tell me about that.
I'm afraid.
What are you afraid of?
The brothers, the Islamic brothers.
You're afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah.
Why?
They want it to be Islamic, like Iran and this. But we don't want it to be like that. We are liberal. That's the way we think.
At that time, it wasn't at all clear what direction the country would take, or even if Mubarak would fall. But you couldn't help but notice that the most powerful player in Egypt, the military, was watching and waiting, contemplating their next move. For revolutionaries, the military was a kind of unholy ally.
The military are not our friends, but I think what the military began to realize when millions of people protested against Mubarak's regime and demanded his ouster was that this power among the people was a real force to reckon with.
On the 17th day of the protests, everyone was listening to a broadcast of Mubarak refusing to go. When suddenly, Mohammed Abbas stepped to center stage. He directly addressed the military. And urged them to finish the job. Less than 24 hours later, Mubarak was gone. Around the world, the revolution was hailed as a victory for the people, a new day in the Arab Spring. But they didn't see what happened next. A few hundred revolutionaries had remained camped on the square, demanding that Mubarak's regime be prosecuted for human rights abuses and corruption. They trusted the military would continue to protect them. But in less than a month, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, or SCAF, the generals now running Egypt, ordered their troops to move in.
On March 9th, very infamously, the SCAF cleared Tahrir Square and took female and male revolutionaries to military prison, where many of them were tortured.
Largely out of sight from Western media, the revolution looked like it was over before it began.
This was a very clear and very early signal that the junta was not on our side, that they were not supporting or protecting our revolution.
It was discovered what we had all, as revolutionaries, suspected was happening, that the army and the military police had been rounding up activists, interestingly enough, in the Egyptian Museum, and torturing them. That they had been establishing checkpoints on Egyptian highways and rounding up again activists and torturing them.
One of those rounded up was the young singer, Rami Essam.
They took me into the museum with 200 other people. I was tortured for 4 straight hours. They used different methods, like hitting me with wooden sticks or iron bars. There is no part of my body that they did not electrocute. The people who were torturing me were not just ordinary soldiers. They were senior officers as well. They tried to humiliate us and taunt us with names, trying to destroy our dignity. They would say, "Are you happy with your revolution now?"
Around 150 men and women arrested on March 9th were tried and convicted in military courts and sent to military prisons. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood had kept its low profile.
The Brotherhood steered away from protests against the military. The few times when they participated in mass protests, they were always very keen and eager on avoiding criticism of the military and silencing voices that say things like "down with military rule" and that kind of stuff.
The Muslim Brothers were the cleverest, and they were the first ones to go to the army and say, "Here, we are at your service, we can work with you."
I think we need to understand that the Brotherhood doesn't have any revolutionary ideology. They don't believe in revolution at all. They believe in what they call gradual reform.
I had seen this during the January 25th revolution. The old guard of the Brotherhood had hung back. I found them far from Tahrir Square at this press conference. While they said they supported the protests, Mohamed Morsi, then a relatively obscure figure, explained they were working with the military.
Since the 25th January revolution, they decided from the beginning to side with the strong players, which was mainly the military.
Throughout 2011, the Brotherhood kept talking to the military, kept off the streets, and outmaneuvered its political rivals. Revolutionaries, liberals, and minorities were nervous about the Brotherhood's ambitions. Egypt's Coptic Christians were especially fearful. Members of Egypt's largest minority religious group, around 10% of the population, the Copts have survived here since the beginning of Christianity. But in recent years, Coptic Christians have seen a steady rise in attacks by ultra-conservative, militant Islamists. Christians expected the government to protect them.
There had been many attacks against churches, and SCAF was doing nothing, just as the Mubarak regime did nothing, to protect the Christian population. And so this massive protest began outside the TV and radio building because many people felt that the state-run TV was inciting people against minorities and against revolutionaries.
The demonstration at the Maspero Press Center was dispersed by the military with brute force.
I think Maspero in October 2011 was a huge turning point. I think it was a traumatic event for the Christian minorities, for Christians in Egypt. This was the first time that the military had used excessive lethal force in that way. 27 protesters were killed.
Mina Daniel, now a celebrated Christian martyr, was among the people protesting that night. Mina's sister Mary remembers.
لقينا ضرب نار اشتغل علينا We came under gunfire and were pursued by armored vehicles, crashing into parked cars. Tear gas bombs were flying. It was a horrible scene. I could not find Mina. I kept calling him, but his mobile was turned off. Then, someone told me that he had been taken to the Coptic hospital. There, I found Mina in the morgue. He looked like he was sleeping, with a smile on his face. I saw a lot of dead bodies around Maspero. I saw one person shot in the neck, and the bullet hole was still visible. I saw a lot of blood. I will never forget that day.
After Maspero, no one was chanting, the army and the people, hand in hand. Six weeks later, voting began for a new Egyptian parliament. I was back in Egypt and found Mohammed Abbas 9 months after we'd first met in early 2011. Abbas was now running for a parliamentary seat, but he was at a disadvantage. He had criticized the Brotherhood's leadership for its failure to speak out against military repression, and he had been expelled from the party. But he remained optimistic about the process.
اشتغلنا عشانها أكتر من أيا كان الاختيار سواء إحنا كنا موافقين عليه أو مختلفين عليه أعتقد إن هو الاختيار الأنسب لمصر.
Whether Abbas would win was unclear, but other Muslim brothers looked to win big. For the Brotherhood, it's been a long fight. The organization was started over 80 years ago, largely as a religious movement. Its motto, Islam is the solution.
The message was a moral message. The time has come to return to Islam.
But for some brothers, the ultimate goal was to build an Islamic state. In the 1940s, they began a campaign of violence against occupying British troops. Then a Muslim brother attempted to assassinate Egypt's secular president. Gamal Abdel Nasser cracked down.
The organization itself was declared illegal, its members were rounded up, its assets were confiscated, and thousands of people sent to prison for years on end.
In the 1970s, President Anwar Sadat also kept up pressure on the Brotherhood. But the movement split over the use of violence. Some members left to join groups like Ayman al-Zawahiri's Islamic Jihad, responsible for Sadat's 1981 assassination.
We tried our best to establish this Islamic State and Islamic society.
Al-Zawahiri would later join forces with Al-Qaeda. But the mainstream leadership of the Brotherhood rejected violence and committed itself to the democratic process. In 2005, their candidates had won 20% of Egypt's parliamentary seats. President Mubarak, perceiving a threat, again cracked down. He closed hundreds of their schools and clinics and arrested over 1,200 members. But persecution seemed to stiffen their resolve. In 2012, with Mubarak gone, they aimed for the presidency.
دكتور محمد مرسي
دكتور محمد مرسي
دكتور محمد مرسي
الدكتور محمد مرسي
دكتور محمد مرسي دكتور محمد مرسي دكتور محمد مرسي دكتور محمد مرسي
No, I never heard Morsi's name before. Before he was, you know, the Muslim Brothers after the revolution and when presidential elections were approaching, they said they will not field any presidential candidate.
I'd heard that before. In fact, I'd heard it from Morsi himself back at that 2011 press conference.
You're not going to have a presidential candidate? Why not?
Yeah, well, we are saying
that it's most important for us to prepare the society. Freedom, democracy, and justice are required now more than just thinking about who will control who.
Soon after, the Brotherhood reversed its position. Morsi, a U.S.-educated engineer, was originally a dark horse candidate.
Nobody really saw him as the man who would take the forefront. I mean, his nickname in the presidential race was the spare tire, because he was the replacement candidate.
But as Egyptians headed for the polls, a runoff had come down to just two men, a Mubarak-era general named Ahmed Shafiq, or Morsi.
I don't believe the majority of people voted for Mohamed Morsi because they wanted him as president. I believe it was a false choice. The majority of people who voted for him because they didn't want the other candidate, who was the military junta candidate, Ahmed Shafiq.
Many people terrified of Shafiq and not happy with the prospect of the former regime returning to power.
The vote was extremely close. It took 1 week for the results to be announced.
ما حصل عليه كل مرشح الدكتور أحمد محمد شفيق زكي 12,347,380 الدكتور محمد مرسي عيسى العياط 13,230,000.
A group that counts its core membership at less than 5% of the Egyptian population had leveraged its way to power. The long outlawed, long persecuted Muslim Brotherhood had won.
It felt incredible. Here we are, the first democratically elected president in the entire history of Egypt, the first civilian to ever head Egypt in the modern era. And it was like stepping into the warm sunshine after a long, long, cold winter.
On Tahrir Square, Morsi stood before his supporters, and in a signal that he was not afraid, he showed the crowd he was not wearing any body armor.
He got elected by the people, 52% of the people, of the Egyptian people. I don't care why they were voting against his opponent, but I mean, they elected him. Why don't people just accept it?
I swear by Almighty God.
Morsi promised to be a president to all Egyptians, and President Obama hailed his election as a milestone in Egypt's transition to democracy. He had won, but he was already facing powerful opponents. Just a few days earlier, Egypt's Supreme Court, packed with Mubarak-era judges, had declared January's parliamentary elections invalid and ordered the parliament shut down. Islamist parties, led by the Muslim Brotherhood, had won nearly 70% of the seats.
They destroyed parliament 2 days before the presidential election. And they knew that if a president comes with a parliament that's been electorally voted in, these two institutions can literally start dismantling the old dictatorship bit by bit. And they had to dysfunction one element of that.
The dilemma is that the Muslim Brotherhood come to power through elections. They're supposedly at the helm of the state. So they are in power, but they're actually not in power.
Egyptians often talk of something they call the deep state, an expression that refers to elements of the Mubarak regime embedded deep inside Egypt's government. The deep state includes the Supreme Court, all state-run media, the police, and at the very top, the army.
The term deep state, I think, originally comes from Turkey. The sense that the military is not necessarily ruling directly, but what you have is kind of underneath the surface of politics, this underlying set of structures that's running things.
The
it is much deeper than what everybody thought. It is really very deep because it's a result of 60 years of bad governance and corruption. So you need some time and you need real drastic measures in order to be able to get rid of that.
ستعود المؤسسات المنتخبة لأداء دورها.
Revolutionaries and liberals who voted for Morsi hoped the new president and a new constitution would restrain Egypt's deep state.
One of the big demands of the Egyptian revolution was to say, we don't want any more torture, we don't want any more abuse by the security services, we don't want any more civilians being tried in military courts, and so forth and so on.
We wanted to have something in the Constitution against torture. We wanted to have something in the Constitution against police brutality. We wanted to have something in the Constitution that would limit the power of the military. But rather than curb the power of the military, the Constitution gave the military everything they wanted.
Basically, what the Constitution guaranteed for the military was safe passage so that none of them were held accountable for their violations of our rights during the junta rule, the SCAF rule, left the military budget untouched, left any kind of civilian oversight of that budget, and allowed the military to continue to put civilians before military tribunals, which were all things that, you know, we, the revolution, wanted to fix.
The fatal mistake is that the Muslim Brotherhood could have turned to us, the revolutionary, and could have turned to Tahrir and to tell them, we need you to write a constitution that would limit the power of the military. We need you to curb and cleanse the very corrupt judiciary. We would have come to his rescue. And instead, he tried to flirt with the police and the military against us.
For any leader, curbing the military would have been hard. In Egypt, the military is more than an army. It's big business, controlling as much as 40% of the economy. They make cars, chemicals, bottled water, and even bread. The full extent of their empire is unknown.
The military is one of the top landowners in the country, and you can't even really get a proper list of military-associated industries. And the military wants to preserve its perks, its privileges, its significant private sector economic empire, and they want to escape from civilian oversight.
Egypt's military also receives $1.3 billion in aid from the United States and enjoys close ties with the Pentagon. Morsi left the military untouched, but in exchange, he wanted the generals to stay out of politics. To cement the deal, Morsi picked a new army chief, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
And it was a relationship of trust because apparently, according to reports, Sisi went out of his way to tell Morsi that he is a pious Muslim, he's a practicing Muslim, and that in fact, even his political ideas about elections and about sovereignty are very much in alignment with that of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Revolutionaries have long felt betrayed by the army and the Brotherhood. Back in Cairo in 2011, I got caught up in protests.
Basically, what happened was just an eruption of people saying that's it. There hasn't been justice for those who were killed, and people seem really ready to say they're just not going to stop until there's justice.
إن لم تكتمل الثورة فبيدفن الشعب معاها. لا هتبقى على الوضع الأولاني بفساده ولا منها كملت مسيرتها. فدي أنصاف الثورات بتفنش الشعب.
After Morsi's election, protests like this continued.
Morsi took over the Mubarak toolkit of state-controlled media, the repressive penal code, and he started using that. And he started using that against his opponents. He would always argue that it was necessary to do that because there were enemies everywhere and the deep state was against him. But when you look even at the record of what he was able to do, or the areas where he had decision-making power, it was often a decision towards a more authoritarian form of rule.
Unfortunately, he was no Mandela. He did not seem to get to grips with the mien of the Egyptian, with the soul of Egypt. We felt that he was divisive.
It was Morsi's greatest weakness. Egypt has always portrayed itself as a diverse, secular state where government kept religion in balance. But Morsi had a different agenda, and his pursuit of exclusionist Islamist politics would ultimately lead to his downfall. The showdown would come over the role of Islamic or Sharia law in the new Egyptian constitution.
Women, Christians, intellectuals, all these were sidelined in the new constitution. They would say you can have liberty of expression, freedom, etc., if it is in conformity with Sharia.
There was a lot of doors that were opened to potentially scary places. The sections in the Constitution that were about women's rights stressed equality, but then they felt the need to insert language, that women are equal and have equal rights and equal work, equal rights to work, as long as it doesn't contradict their duties at home. Like little obnoxious things like that.
In the fall of 2012, Islamists began to fear that the judiciary might shut down the Constituent Assembly, the body drafting the new constitution. Morsi struck a preemptive blow.
On 21st of November, Morsi issued a constitutional decree that gave him a lot of powers and put him above the constitution, above the law.
And you can't do that. He didn't have enough of a mandate to behave like a pharaoh.
The declaration gave Morsi the ability to take any and all actions that he alone deemed necessary to protect the country.
We had the making of a dictator. This went way beyond anything that Mubarak had done.
One quarter of the Constitutional Assembly resigned in protest. The Islamists rammed through their new constitution regardless.
And that was the turning point. For me personally, that is when I said, no. This cannot be my president.
In April 2013, a group of activists started a petition calling for Morsi to step aside. They gave their movement a name, Tamarud.
Tamarud means rebel. What Tamarud managed to do is that they started gathering signatures for a popular impeachment of Morsi.
I saw these petitions. There was just a list of grievances, and these are the reasons why we have lost faith in you, and we demand early elections.
Tamarud called for mass protests on the first anniversary of Morsi's inauguration, June 30th, 2013. But Morsi and his advisors didn't take it seriously.
They did not really believe that the 30th June will be a decisive day. They thought that it will come and go.
Member of Parliament Amr Moussa set up a meeting with the highest-ranking member of the Muslim Brotherhood, Khairat el-Shatter.
I told him that Tamarud insisted on one point: early presidential elections. So it was not talking about any change or forcible change in the regime, but early elections. Early elections is a very reasonable thing.
U.S. officials didn't think so. Ann Patterson, U.S. ambassador to Egypt, was uncomfortable with forcing a democratically elected president from office.
It was very clear from her public announcements that Ann Patterson thought that Egyptians should swallow this pill and be content with a miserable regime because the alternative is much worse for us.
But by mid-June, Tamarud claimed to have collected 22 million signatures, nearly half of all eligible voters. Worried about what could happen on June 30th, General el-Sisi went to see Morsi and urged him to consider Tamarud's demands.
And that meant a change in cabinet, a prime minister from the opposition, a change in the prosecutor general, and the president actually acquiesced to all those demands.
but Morsi refused to step aside.
The idea that that focused demand would be the resignation of the president, to us made absolutely no sense. If the street becomes the way of removing a democratically elected president 1 year into his mandate, then no other presidency will survive in the future.
With hours to go before Egyptians took to the streets, President Obama tried repeatedly to reach Morsi.
He called him for 3 or 4 times. He insisted to Mr. Morsi to receive the call. He received it, and it was about 30 minutes.
Did President Obama try to offer anything to allow him to hold on to power and to build a more conciliatory government?
We refuse. Mr. Obama called to Mr. Morsi in the last sentence, said, if there is a military coup, we cannot prevent it.
The White House declined comment to Frontline, but Morsi has clung to the idea that he was the target of a U.S. plot.
And this is one of Brotherhood tactics, how to maintain solidarity and integration of the movement by creating an external enemy that can justify any decision by the leadership.
Then came the day. The protest was larger than anyone imagined.
I just couldn't believe it. I was dumbfounded by all these people coming out. Already there were millions filling all the squares, the Midans of Egypt. Not only in Cairo, but in Alexandria, in the provinces, everywhere.
The mood was amazingly jubilant. It's people power. And this is something electrifying when you feel it.
They were chanting against Morsi, they were chanting against the Muslim Brotherhood, and some people were chanting for the military.
At the palace, the inner circle of the Muslim Brotherhood had a different interpretation of what was happening.
What was happening on the street was not opposition. What was happening on the street were disgruntled citizens that feel that the government's performance was way below their expectations. And that wasn't the blame of the president. That was primarily the undermining of the old regime. It was his decision not to resign.
Instead of conceding, Morsi rallied his supporters. The Muslim Brotherhood organized several demonstrations and sit-ins of their own. The biggest was at Cairo's famous Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque.
There are millions of supporters of Morsi too. Not as large as the anti-Morsi crowd, it is true, but they're in a very close proximity. We're talking only kilometers apart, in a city that is very congested and very, very heavily populated. The possibility of civil war was as high as it could have ever been.
Egypt was really on the brink of civil war. This regime was so divisive that for the first time we saw Egyptians pitted against each other.
On July 1st, General el-Sisi issued an ultimatum.
بأنه إذا لم تتحقق مطالب الشعب خلال المهلة المحددة فسوف يكون لزاما عليها أن تعلن عن خارطة مستقبل.
Morsi had 48 hours to meet the people's demands, or else. Morsi responded, daring el-Sisi to come and get him.
لا أسمح ولا أرضى بأن يخرج علينا من يقول كلاما يخالف الشرعية. هذا مرفوض. هذا مرفوض. هذا مرفوض.
He made no concessions, very Mubarak style. And, you know, in a sense, the writing was on the wall when the military made that first ultimatum.
El-Sisi pressed on, reaching out to the crowd still in Tahrir Square.
The army made its appearance with air shows trailing the Egyptian flag with their colors, drawing hearts. And personally, I thought this was a bit too cheap, but apparently it wasn't. And people thought that is the answer.
On July 3rd, an elite army unit was dispatched to the palace.
He didn't foresee that it would come about this way. Members of the Republican Guard, the Presidential Guard, came into the room, told the president that he is in their safeguard, that they would not allow anything to befall him, any harm to befall him, but that they cannot let him communicate with the outside world or leave the room.
By the end of the night, Morsi was in military custody, along with a dozen other high-ranking members of the Brotherhood. General el-Sisi took over.
تعطيل العمل بالدستور بشكل مؤقت على أن يتولى رئيس المحكمة الدستورية العليا إدارة شؤون البلاد خلال المرحلة الانتقالية ولحين انتخاب رئيسا جديدا.
Tahrir Square erupted. But at the Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque, men and women wept.
This definitely was very painful. We lost a country on July 3rd. But there was a quick decision made, a quick realization that we don't have to tolerate this. We will fight this.
The Muslim Brotherhood dug in. At the Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque, they set up a field hospital, a press center, and established a kind of human shield to protect their leaders inside. The son of a senior Muslim Brotherhood official became their principal press spokesman. He claimed the high moral ground.
What's at stake here is not Morsi. What's at stake here is the fact that for the first time, Egyptians were believing in the idea of democracy. What guarantees do they have if the military now sets a new roadmap for a new presidential election, a new parliamentary election, and a new constitution, and then if it doesn't like the results, to derail it all at once?
I know they still think it is the first civilian president that was ousted undemocratically, unconstitutionally, and so on. But they have to face it. Never in human history has there been such an outpour of rage against a regime. And it happened that President Morsi, was head of that regime.
The first shots were fired at dawn on July 8th, just 5 days after Morsi's arrest, and a few blocks from the Rabaa Mosque. The army says they were provoked. The Brotherhood says the military started it. Nothing was clear. But after several hours, 3 soldiers and more than 50 pro-Morsi demonstrators were dead. I arrived back in Egypt a few days later. I had never seen Cairo like this. Pro-Morsi marches blocked traffic everywhere. Divisions were evident at every street corner. I wanted to know what Mohammed Abbas thought of all this. Abbas had lost his bid for parliament and grown disillusioned with Morsi, but I couldn't imagine he was happy with a military takeover.
Mohammed.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine.
I asked him about military rule.
قعدنا سنة ونص في حكم العسكر، هو اللي بيتحرك وهو اللي بيتحكم بكل شيء فترة طويلة، كنا بننزل ضد مظاهرات بشكل قوي وكبير في الشارع بشكل آخر، أو هو بالفعل رجع بشكل تاني إن هو بينقلب ويعمل انقلاب حقيقي على السلطة المنتخبة اللي احنا كنا عايزينها ترحل بس بشكل أكثر مدنيا يدعو الرئيس المنتخب للانتخابات الرئاسية المبكرة.
So you describe this as a military coup?
Yes, of course. That's a military coup, nothing else. مش ناويين إن احنا نجيب ماريونيت هو الرئيس المؤقت ويبقى هو الرئيس بشكل ما ووراه العسكر هو اللي بيتحرك هو اللي بيعمل كل حاجة. مش هنقبل إن احنا نرجع لقبل مبارك والمؤسسة العسكرية مرة أخرى.
Later that night, Abbas and I were caught up in a pro-Morsi protest headed towards Tahrir Square. The march was blocked by police. Rock throwing, tear gas, and shots followed.
Come on! Tear gas landing!
By the end of the evening, another 7 protesters were dead. These confrontations were quickly becoming almost daily affairs.
Both sides appear to be allowing this violence to go on. And this, in a way, allows the military to say the Brotherhood are criminals and they all need to be locked up. At the same time, I don't understand why Brotherhood leaders are ordering marches, putting the lives of their own supporters at risk.
The next day, at the Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque, the Muslim Brotherhood held a press conference. They had wheeled out the wounded and praised their martyrs to a room full of reporters. I asked Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Beltaghi about the criticism that they were intentionally putting their supporters at risk.
There are people who say that this is a strategy by the Muslim Brotherhood to create martyrs for the movement.
It is strange that you are saying that a peaceful protester benefits from being killed, but you do not address who is doing the killing. Who else in the world can attack peaceful protesters? Do you want me to go home and surrender and tell myself that our reality is a military coup? I have a right to protest peacefully and reject this military coup.
I asked another of the leaders, Assam El-Aryan, how long the Muslim Brotherhood could hold out.
The people are more courage. They have no fear in their chests. They inspire freedom and cannot leave it again. And they can sacrifice and can have tens of martyrs, maybe hundreds of martyrs, to restore the inspired spirit of the revolution and continue reforming as a democratic country.
The situation was only escalating. On July 24th, General el-Sisi called for an end to the demonstrations at the mosque and for the people to show him their support.
أنا عايز حضراتكم يا كل المصريين تنزلوا يفوض الجيش والشرطة باتخاذ اللازم لمجابهة هذا العنف وهذا الإرهاب.
That Friday, millions of Egyptians gathered again, answering el-Sisi's call.
The animosity against the Brotherhood was so intense that there really did seem to be a desire to just wipe them off the political playing field. And I've had conversations with people where their solution is, you know, in Arabic translates to just round them all up. How do we function as a country when we've rounded up 15% of the dissidents?
There was now no stopping the momentum. A series of meetings with high-level envoys from the United States and Europe failed to convince General el-Sisi to hold off. Threats of withholding U.S. military aid were ignored. Then, at 7 a.m. on August 14th, the police surrounded the Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque. Soldiers blocked all the exits from the square.
The Brotherhood felt that if we are going to die today, there is no better place to die, and there's no better cause to die for than to say not all Egyptians supported this.
For over 12 hours, the protesters were subjected to tear gas and snipers. The ferocity of the campaign was historic in its brutality. By day's end, hundreds lay dead. The Rabaa al-Adawiya Mosque was in ruins. The Muslim Brotherhood had once again been crushed, driven underground. Leaders I met and interviewed are on the run, or, like Mohammed Morsi, in detention, accused of treason and inciting violence. Mohammed Abbas has fled the country. The future, he fears, is more dictatorship. The deep state is still in charge.
Go to pbs.org/frontline for a closer look at Egypt's deep state.
It is really very deep. This underlying set of structures that's running things.
A timeline of the 2 years of turmoil following Egypt's revolution. Additional reporting from our partners at Global Post. Plus, watch the film again online and follow Frontline on Facebook and Twitter, or tell us what you think at pbs.org/frontline.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Major support for Frontline is provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is available at macfound.org. Additional funding is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to heightening public awareness of critical issues. The Wincoat Foundation, and by the Frontline Journalism Fund, with grants from Millicent Bell through the Millicent and Eugene Bell Foundation, and Scott Nathan and Laura DeBonis.
This and other Frontline programs, visit our website at pbs.org/frontline. Frontline Frontline's Egypt in Crisis is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. Frontline is also available for download on iTunes.